Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Edie Koro Aradari. I go by Edie, and I'm going to be talking to you today about a little bit of how Hub is built, or basically what continuous integration and continuous delivery and deployment mean for us. A little bit of background, I have been with Esri now for about a year. Before then, I was with Comcast. I was a lead QA engineer on the voice services platform. So the remote where you ask it to watch ESPN and watch Disney and Vanderpump Rules. I basically helped design the software development delivery pipeline for that software. Before that, I also worked at AOL. I was a member of the email team there, and I did some work on some back-end web services there. So most of my experience has been from the testing side. And here at Esri, I've kind of been trying to make a transition into DevOps. So this is going to be kind of an overview of what CI and CD means for us, how we implement it, and some of the pain points that we have seen along the way. I'm not going to go too deep into the actual technical implementation, but if there are questions, I would be more than happy to answer those. All right, so let's go ahead and kick this off. All right, cool. So here we go. So the basic agenda is going to talk about CI, continuous instability, or CD, continuous disappointment, which is a term that Courtney, one of our product engineers, coined. And then also kind of go over why you want to consider doing this, as part of your software development practice. So this, the continuous integration term, this is the definition on Wikipedia, right? It's the practice of merging all developer working copies to a shared mainline several times a day. So if you're practicing Git flow or GitHub flow, or you're using SVN, if you really want to be following the letter of the law of CI, then that means that you will be, merging your, let's say, your master or develop branch into your feature branch multiple times a day. So what this means is if the develop branch changes, then that means that your feature branch needs to be updated. So it is definitely a good practice because this kind of follows what a lot of people are saying now are the best practices in terms of moving bugs and errors, like shifting all that stuff left. So, the more you are integrating your code, the more you're keeping your code up to date and integrated, you're going to have a better chance of catching errors before they ever get to production. So again, the strict letter of the law for continuous integration is just making sure that your feature branch is up to date with whatever the mainline branch is. And then for CD, continuous delivery. Continuous delivery is basically you want to have a process that will allow you and your team to generate a production-ready artifact at all times. So what this means is if you're merging to master, let's say master is your production release, anytime the code on the master branch changes, the end result should be an artifact that can be deployed to production. And as this tweet says, continuous delivery doesn't mean every change is deployed to production as soon as possible. It means every change is proven to be deployable at any time. And part of actually the proven part is testing. And obviously, testing has to be a part of your development pipeline. In fact, I should have covered this in the continuous integration part, because you need a way to be able to tell when your code is ready to go. So having automated tests in place is basically your gate for controlling when your code is ready to be deployed to your staging or your production environments. But again, continuous delivery is just the ability to automatically generate a production-ready artifact all the time, regardless of whether or not you are going to deploy it. So there is another CD, and this is continuous deployment. So unlike continuous delivery, you're generating a production-ready artifact. Continuous deployment, you are deploying that production-ready artifact whenever it's ready. This is the holy grail of CI and CD, and this is what every team who is trying to practice, trying to use agile software development practices and practicing DevOps. This is where you want to go. So for your developers and your dev team, what this means is that if I merge my code to the master branch and I run it through my build pipeline and all my tests are green, then that is basically the same thing as doing a release. This is not a good flow for all teams because, again, depending on your product, there are very good reasons for not just always going to production. We at Hub, we actually are practicing continuous delivery. So a merge to master is, very similar to, we have an artifact that can be deployed. So if product decides that they want to release a certain artifact, they have the ability to do so. And again, the main goal of all of this, right, is to deliver better software to your customers. That can't be lost in all of the crazy, with all the crazy tooling. Like sometimes this gets lost. At the end of the day, you want to be providing value to your customers, right? They aren't really interested in whether you're using Jenkins or Travis or GoCD or SVN or Git. At the end of the day, they really care about having, a better product and to be able to receive features from, us as a development team a lot faster. And then the other thing is that a side effect of this is that your developers are no longer worried about how to deploy the code. They can spend more of their time focusing on developing new features. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the tools that we use to help us get there. So first thing is just we obviously have to have some kind of source control. So whether that's Git or SVN or Mercurial or Perforce, if some of you are lucky enough to still be using that, you need a shared place to kind of host your code and have it be easily accessible, not only by you, but any CI or CD tool that you are going to have in place. The other piece of tech that's a part of our CI and CD pipeline is Jenkins. And Jenkins is the thing that orchestrates our development and deployment pipelines for us. So we have some pipelines for building and testing code. And then because we are practicing continuous delivery and not continuous deployment, we also have some pipelines that our product engineers can kick off themselves to release their production-ready applications, to release the production-ready artifacts to production. And the things I'm going to be talking to you about today are applicable whether you're using Jenkins, whether you're using Travis, whether you're using GoCD or Bamboo. At a very high level, all of the goals of CI and CD are still available regardless of which combination of tools you're using. Another tool that we make a lot of use of is Slack, and that's just because that's where most of our team is located, and that's the one place I know that I can send messages to people and get feedback from. When I first joined, we were using Travis, but we didn't have the Slack integration set up. So there was a little bit of misinformation for when the build was not green. So one of the big things that I did when I joined the team was basically, one, we moved to Jenkins just because that's what I'm most familiar with. And also, making sure that the Slack integration was there just to get some basic information as to what the current build status is. And the glue that kind of ties all of these things together is the pipeline. And in my mind, a pipeline is basically just like a scripted, repeatable, and automated set of steps for building, testing, and deploying your pipeline. This is really, really important because it will allow you to kind of just get more control over how and when your software is delivered. Yep, so that's it. And this is an example of a build pipeline. And this is just the Jenkins implementation of it. Another reason I chose Jenkins is because, one, this visualization is really powerful. It allows devs to kind of get instant feedback for, one, not only what the current status of the build is, but where there could be problems. Like Jez Humble and there's, I think, Gene Kim, they basically wrote the book on continuous delivery. And their advice with kind of building these pipelines out is that you want them to be like short and deep. So you want to basically set up as many parallel steps as you possibly can just to optimize the build and keep it to a, you don't want your build times to be too long, because if a developer is sitting there and waiting for 20 minutes for the build to finish, which we were doing at a time, it took a really long time to kind of get that down, and for, I guess, separate reasons that I'll get into. But yeah, you can see here, it's just there's a build phase, there's tests for unit tests. You can run your functional tests and get that stage feedback for when and if failures happen. And then, in this case, a build artifact is deployed to dev, then deployed to staging, then deployed to production. In the real world, you're definitely going to want to have some kind of gate between when you move from one environment to the next. It can be tests, and some kind of manual feedback or manual confirmation. But it's really about how your team works and what works best for you. And you're going to go through all of these and try and match up a bunch of different tools. And the reason you want to do that is basically to improve situational awareness, right? So here we have a picture of two ships just colliding into each other. So at some point they lost situational awareness, right? If they had the correct information, they would have made the right choice. And that's the same thing I find with my dev team as well. If they had known that master was broken, that master was red, that master was failing, they're not going to merge a PR on top of it, right? They're going to try and find out why the master branch is broken before any other merges happen there. This is one piece I think that we were missing before we kind of changed the way we set up our pipelines. They just didn't know. So even like sending the current build status of the master branch to Slack, that is one of the biggest things I think that we have gotten from our CI and CD pipeline. The current status of the build is not unknown, and it's a lot easier to get that information, and it's a lot easier to act on that information, before we ever get to production. So in that same vein, communication is good. So here's an example of some of the Slack messages that we send during builds of the Open Data and Hub products. So we basically send feedback for each stage of the pipeline. There's a link there for them to go to that instance and actually see some detailed log information if they choose to. And then also these, because of the way Jenkins is tied to GitHub, we get a lot of notification messages sent there as well. So part of setting up the CI and CD is just making information more actionable so that, again, developers are more effective at their jobs, and it's a lot easier for them to make the correct decisions for how the build or deployment should happen. And another thing is perfect software. This is a thing I think everybody wants to get to, but in my experience, it has never happened, at least in my experience. I can't speak for any other person that's here. But just because the software isn't perfect doesn't mean that we shouldn't spend time ironing out a CI and CD pipeline. It just puts you in a better position to deliver more consistent, better performant software. The easier it is for your dev team to build and test and deploy your software, you're going to find that they're going to be able to fix bugs a lot faster than they would normally. And there is definitely a certain amount of trust. They need to be able to trust that the CI and the CD system is consistent and that it is stable, and those results are indicative of actual problems in the app. And it's going to take a few iterations to get there. At first we had some tuning issues. As I said before, the build was taking about 20 minutes to run, and which is, it's too long. By the time the build finishes, the dev has disengaged or moved on to like another feature. So thanks to some work from my colleague, Jeremy, we were able to kind of get that build time down to about 5 minutes or so through kind of a clever use of Docker images and caching dependencies. We're building an Ember application, so Node, as some of you know, downloads the entire internet all the time. So we don't want it to do that on every single build. So it was really important to come up with a good caching strategy for kind of dealing with that and helping us get our devs time back. And then this part is kind of a double-edged sword. I said automate as much as possible. I think this is my favorite piece of automation that I have done this year. And it's a simple Slack message that lets the engineers know that our Jenkins infrastructure is going down for maintenance. And this is a very trivial add-on that really honestly has nothing to do with the pipeline. But because we have enough automation there in place, I can spend time building other tooling out to help make my job easier. So this is a thing I used to have to do manually. I don't have to do it anymore. So that's 2 seconds of my day that I get back. And we do update this infrastructure like multiple times a day. That is kind of the side effect of using containers, but using containers is not the only way to do this. What is more important is that you have a way or a process to build your software consistently, to test it, and to get it to production. And then one other thing that I found that helped a lot is just patience. Asking my dev team to kind of switch from Travis, which they were used to, and to move to Jenkins was a big ask. And they were patient with me and gave me time to kind of iron out bugs and kind of optimize that build process. And then, I also had to be patient with them as well too, because, they are getting more information now than they were before. And there were definitely some, let me say continuous instigation that was happening there. Just because, this was just a new process for both of us in terms of, again, exposing communication and getting communication going between ops and dev to make sure that we have, a more stable product in production. So, at the end of the day, our goals are aligned just because we want to deliver better software to our customers. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And can I open up the floor for questions? If there are any? Sure, yep.
Yeah, so on that slide about updating Jenkins, you kind of implied that was like a consequence of using containers. What's the connection between the two? Using containers and then needing to do Jenkins?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess the question is like, what's the connection between using containers and having to update often? Because we're using containers, it's easy to update. So we use the LTS version of Jenkins. So if there's like some kind of security hotfix or performance tuning fix, it's very easy for me to upgrade the version of Jenkins that we're running. All I have to do is basically take the latest, the latest image that was released, just get that version number, and then I can deploy that there. Yeah. So. Yes, yeah, and that's exactly what we're doing. So like I said, side effect, that's probably the wrong way to put it. But because we're using containers, it's really easy to update it. Like Jenkins itself kind of operates just like a database, right? So as long as your /var/Jenkins_home is stored separately from the container, like I can just change container versions pretty much at will because the state and the memory of the Jenkins instance is stored in /var/Jenkins_home. Yeah. Yep. Any other questions? Sorry, what was that? Oh, the question was how often do we release? That's a good question. So we release once a week. We were releasing once a week before, so the release cadence has pretty much stayed exactly the same. But again, the main benefit of this whole pipeline that we set up is that it is more automated and there's less human interaction than there was before. So we are probably looking to kind of update the release cadence, but baby steps. Yep. So. No, that's another good question. The question was, since we are releasing once a week, does that mean we're doing 1 week sprints? No, we still do 2 week sprints, but.
What do you release in each week, in the week in between sprints?
So the question is, what do we release in the weeks between the sprints?
Yeah, because the developers actually release their changes at the end of the sprint. So if you're releasing mid-sprint, what are you actually giving the customer?
So for us, what is in master is what is going to go to the customer most of the time, right? Yeah. So and again for us, anytime code is merged to master, that essentially is a release. So we typically use the git SHA, and that SHA is basically a deployable artifact that can be sent to production. And so we just design pipelines that allow our product engineers to basically say, okay, I want this SHA with these features today, and that's what I'm going to send to production. So typically every Tuesday they kind of go through the build to see if there's anything that they want to get sent out to customers, and yeah, that's how that typically works. Yep. Sorry, go ahead. Yep. That's a good question. So the question is, I mentioned caching the dependencies of node projects, and what are the tools to do that? Google. So I mean, we're using Jenkins and we're using Docker, so it's just we're kind of doing a combination of like Docker volumes and also AWS mounted EBS volumes. And because of the way we have Ember and Lerna set up, I know where that node modules folder is going to be. And I think Ember just recently got support for Yarn workspaces in Ember CLI 2.18. So because of the Yarn workspaces, like that root node modules folder contains most of the dependencies for my project. So that's one thing that has a mounted EBS volume on the VM where the Jenkins instance runs. The other thing that we do as well is we cache the global cache. So I think that's like by default it's the user's home folder in the .cache. So a lot of Yarn and npm dependencies live there. So those volumes are ephemeral with the build agents themselves. So on every update, the build agents are built from scratch. So typically the first build is just warming the cache back up again. We'll probably move that into some kind of systemd process so that as part of the boot up and configuration of the build agent itself, it'll populate its cache. So that'll be not only the node dependencies, but then any Docker images that we use for the build as well too. Yeah. Any other questions? Right up? All right, cool. Thank you so much for your time.